Whenever we're drawing or painting something that is new to us, or even something we're familiar with, it's always a good idea to start with a draft sketch or a draft version. I find it's best to use the same size paper as whatever the final version will be. We're making a cake, and a cake is basically a cylinder. So to make a cylinder, I always start with a ellipse or sort of flattened circle on the top. And then from that, I'm going to take my pencil and make some vertical lines on either side. So this is going to make it more like the cylinder shape. And then I like to try to mirror the curve from the top as I move down without touching my pencil to the paper. And I'm going to just kind of mirror that and then create that curve to create the bottom of the cylinder, or in this case, the bottom of our cake. For this one, we want to cut a slice out of the cake, and there are two ways that we could do that. One, we can just do it freehand, or two, we can use a ruler, and the ruler will give us a very straight vertical line. We want this line to be parallel to the lines that we've already made, and we're just going to make one line and then move over a little bit for how wide we want the slice to be, and then make a second line. We can use the ruler to double check the length of our vertical lines to see if they are about equal on the sides, and if they're not, we can make a few corrections. It's not a big deal. Next, we want to finish on the slice. So what you want to do is figure out where the middle point would be between the two lines that we had made for the slice, and then measure upward into the center of the cake and make a dot. That is going to be the inner point of the cutout slice. And then we want to make another dot towards the bottom, not directly on the bottom curve of the cake because we're cutting into the cake. So another dot, and then from that dot we're going to connect the dot to the end of the vertical line on the bottom, and then do the same thing, connect the dot to the top of the vertical line on the top, and that's going to get us started on cutting out the slice. And then we're going to draw another vertical line from one dot to the other. That's the inner part of that slice. So you can probably see it's starting to look like a cutout slice. We've got those curves in the way. Now we can erase them. Now we want to start thinking about what the inner filling part of the cake might look like. So we're going to create some parallel lines following that angle for the slice to indicate where there's a filling to this cake. And then we can also add a plate. So a plate is going to sort of come out and go through without drawing through the cake and just kind of curve around. It's a curved sort of oval ellipse that is going to create the plate. And just you can do it really sketchy and then erase anything if you need to. Just get that basic shape. And then sometimes the plate will have a second curve inside of it to make almost like a rim or a lip, and you can add that as well if you want to. This looks like a really plain cake, so now let's think about adding some frosting details. And you can think about what cakes look like in the bakery or in the store or in the shop, and add frosting details any way that you like. This is a very basic frosting that I'm doing with sort of a roughly rounded part around the top of the cake and then also around the bottom of the cake. You could do rosettes, or you could do different types of piped icing designs. I'm also adding a rose in the very center, but you can do any kind of cake that you want. Lastly, I'm just adding a line to indicate a tabletop so that the cake isn't just floating off in space. This is going to be the final paper, and I've got my sketch underneath here. Now there's two ways we can get our design from our sketch paper to our final paper. One way is if you have a light box or some windows, you could tape the sketch up and then tape the final paper over it and trace. That's an excellent way to transfer your drawing and you get the most accuracy. If you don't have that option, then we're going to just redraw it. But this time it's a little tricky because we are not going to use any pencil. We are going to use oil pastels, which of course can't be erased, but that's okay because if we do our loose marks, a lot of those loose marks are going to get hidden when we paint it, so don't worry about it. As I'm redrawing this cake in the oil pastels, I am choosing to do this freehand and not use a ruler. You can of course use a ruler if that is easier for you, but I'm not, and I'm also switching up the colors every so often to get different colors for these lines. And there's a reason for that. It is because when we were looking at our example artist of Wayne Thiebaud, you would have these kind of colors around the edges of his paintings, and this is going to show through a little bit. When we paint, we'll see some of these bright colors kind of peeking through around the lines that I'm making. Some of these lines are going to get hidden by paint, but we can intentionally leave some showing. Here I have my paint palette set up with white in a lot of the spaces, but in between the white I do have the primary colors, and I'm using these toothpicks to help me mix the colors. Sometimes using toothpicks can be a little easier than mixing colors with a brush. The first color I'm mixing is going to be pink. Pink is a tint that is made by adding a little bit of red into white to tint the white paint with the red paint, and that's what gives you pink. Now I'm using my larger flat brush, and I'm going to use this pink to paint the tabletop background. I'm keeping the brush strokes following the direction of the tabletop, so I'm going horizontally across the paper. I'm not putting my brush strokes in varying directions or vertically because I want them to follow the direction of the tabletop. Okay, so now I want to make this tint a little bit darker, a darker shade of pink. So I'm adding more red into the mixture that I already have, just to get this to be a little bit of a different pink. And this darker pink is going to be used for the background or wall area. Again, I'm using horizontal strokes, not vertical strokes, not strokes going in different directions, horizontal strokes of my paintbrush. Next, I'm going to use a wet into wet technique because I think that this dark pink isn't different enough from the tabletop pink. So I'm using a little bit of blue just on the tip of my brush, and I'm blending that into the paint that's already there in the background using a wet into wet technique to get this to be a little bit of a different color, a little bit more of a purple tint to it. Now I'm mixing up another color. I want a pale yellow, so I'm using a clean toothpick and taking some regular yellow paint and mixing that into a white paint area to get this very light pale pastel yellow. I've switched to a smaller flat brush because it will fit better into the space that I need, and I'm using this yellow to paint the cake. I'm noticing that it is a little bit transparent, so that means I might have to go back and do additional layers if I want it to be darker or don't want things to show through as much. Now I'm switching over to white. I'm using white for the frosting of my cake. So I'm frosting the sides of my cake and then the top of my cake with this white paint. Just getting that all on the surface, and you can see that the oil pastel is showing through, which is fine. No problem with that. Now I'm going to mix up another color. This time I want to get a very pale purple, pale lavender. So I've got the white paint that I've mixed a little bit of red and then a little bit of blue into, and I've got this pale purple lavender color, and I've decided to go over some parts of the white frosting so that I can make it look a little bit more three-dimensional. So some parts I'm leaving with the white by itself, but then on the sides I'm mixing in a little bit of purple, a little bit of blue, even now because the purple wasn't quite dark enough, so that I can make it look more three-dimensional. Now I'm using that purple that I had mixed up to also paint the plate. So I'm adding that to the rim or the lip of the plate. And then I'm using white for the middle of the plate. So the middle part is a little bit lighter just to kind of make it look different than the rim area. I've decided that I would like an even darker pink, so I'm adding more red into the pink that I had before, so that's going to give me a darker pink, and I'm using my brush now to paint in the filling of the cake. So for my cake, it's a dark pink, maybe it's strawberry or raspberry or just pink frosting, but you can of course make your cake any flavor you want, any variety, so you might have had other colors that you've picked for the frosting, for the plate, for all of the steps leading up to this. I've decided that the yellow is definitely too transparent, so I'm going back over it to make it a little bit darker. So on one side I'm keeping it with this lighter yellow, and then for the other side of the slice I'm actually adding a little bit more yellow into the paint to make it darker, because I want that slice to sort of be in shadow. So again, to make this look more three-dimensional. So one half is a little bit lighter, the other half is a little bit darker. After looking at my cake, I've decided I want a little bit of a darker purple, so I am changing that pale purple by adding some red and blue, mixing it up to get a darker purple than I had before. And now I'm going to use that newly mixed purple to really darken up and increase the contrast on the frosting. So I'm filling in the top of the cake with this darker purple, and then I'm going to also add it to the sides of the cake to make it, again, push that three-dimensional look, get that to be more of a three-dimensional cake. And I don't want it to be a sharp, like, straight line. I want it to blend, so I will go back in and then blend that out a little bit with some white so that it's a more subtle transition. I don't want it to look like a striped cake. And I'm also working a little bit more on the plate, adding some more white in there, especially where the slice is cut out, where I can see the oil pastel that was there peeking through. I want that to have a little bit more coverage where it's a little too transparent. So now I'm going to make that purple even a little bit more dark. I'm adding more blue, more red to get that to be a even darker purple than I had before. And I am actually going to switch to a round brush, because a round brush is going to work better for this. And I am going to start adding some of the frosting details that were not already there. So I'm just sort of dabbing my brush to make that frosting around the top edge of the cake. And then the same thing for the bottom edge, so that the frosting is on the top and the bottom. And then I am going to also dip my brush back into white, and this is going to kind of make that frosting look more three-dimensional. I'm just going to dab some white right on the top, mixes in a little bit with the purple, but that's okay. It actually works fine. It gives it that three-dimensional look that we're going for. Now I'm adding the rosette to the middle of the cake with the dark pink paint that I had mixed, and then I'm using some white over the top just so that you can see that it has individual petals, that it's not just sort of a wobbly blob of a circle. And I can also make an even darker pink, add some more red into that, so I want to build up contrast. And I'm going to use that to darken one side of the filling, just like I did with the yellow part, so that way it's got more dimension. And I can add some of that darker into the rose to give that more dimension as well. Next, I need to mix up something for the leaves for my rose, so I'm adding some yellow into the pale yellow that I already had, and then mixing some blue in that as well, and that should give me a sort of minty green color, and that is going to work really well for making leaves for my rose. First, I'm checking to make sure that the purple is dry, because I don't want to mix the purple and green together. And then I am just painting on my leaf shapes, one leaf on either side of the rose. Next, I'm going to use the toothpick and do a little bit of a trick and dip that into the yellow paint and then draw with it to make the center line of each leaf. So there is our finished painting of our cake. If we wanted to, once this is dry, we could go back over some parts with the oil pastel to bring back some of those outlines that disappeared. But otherwise, this is our finished cake. I hope you enjoyed painting it.